Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. And if you are new, thanks for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. I've been doing recommendations for book clubs based on a book club that I started, I'm thinking back in 2012, and I ran for over 10 years. And up to this point, I have done recommendations of fiction books that we read, non-fiction books, some humor books, and books written by Indigenous authors. So I'm going to leave a link to the playlist below so you can check that out. And today I'm going to talk about 10 more recommendations for book clubs. And in this case, I'm actually going to be recommending 10 authors. So I'm focusing more on the authors than the books. 3 of them were some of our favorites, and the other 7 are authors that we read more than one of their books over time. So I've already shared some Indigenous authors that we read more than one, several of their books. So I didn't include them again in this list, but you can definitely go and check that video out if that's something that you're looking for, that you're interested in. So I am going to share these in order of how many books we read of each author. And I am going to start with one book that we read by Sue Monk Kidd. My book club read The Invention of Wings, which was published in 2014. This was a 5-star book for me and others. And many of you know that Sue Monk Kidd is definitely one of my favorite authors. This story takes place in Charleston in the early 19th century, and it begins with 2 young girls. One is Hetty, and she's known as Handful, and she is a slave for the Grimke family. The other little girl is Sarah Grimke, who is actually based on a real-life character, and Sarah is given ownership of Hetty on her 11th birthday. And the book follows their relationship over the next 30 plus years as they both deal with life, wanting to be independent, and they deal with loss and betrayal and love. And this is just a beautiful read. Another favorite for us was Alice Hoffman, and I've read a few Alice Hoffman books, and I've enjoyed them very much. The book that our book club read was The Dovekeepers. This is a historical fiction novel that takes place in Masada, and Masada is now a national park in Israel, which I actually had the opportunity to visit probably over 25 years ago now. What makes Masada so well known is the event that happened in 70 CE. Almost 1,000 Jews held out for months against Roman armies. It's a pretty incredible story. And it's believed by historians that 2 women and 5 children actually survived. And Hoffman takes this history and tells a story of 4 incredible women who are all dovekeepers. And their lives intersect during the siege with their own stories and secrets. So this is a really great story. The third author that we all enjoyed was Swedish author Fredrik Backman. We read Anxious People, which is basically a bank robbery gone wrong. It is jammed full of quirky characters who are visiting an open house in an apartment building, and a bank robber ends up hiding out at the open house. And then the story is all about, who these characters are, why they are even there in the first place, and how they might be connected. So this has what I think Backman is really good at and what he's known for, which is humor alongside some darker themes, and it worked really well for our book club pick. The next 5 authors are all authors that we read 2 of their books in our book club, and I'm going to share them basically in the order that I enjoyed them from least enjoyed, although that's hard to say because I enjoyed all of them, to most enjoyed. So I'm going to start with Canadian author Amy McKay. I have read most of her books, and the 2 that we read for book club were The Birth House and The Virgin Cure. And the birth house takes place in Nova Scotia, and it's about Dora Rare, who is the first female born in 5 generations in her family. She becomes a midwife's apprentice. And the story follows the different pregnancies and ways of midwifery. And things take an ugly turn when a doctor comes to town and attempts to persuade all of the women that his way of childbirth is so much better. So if you like stories with female empowerment and that has themes of childbirth and motherhood, then this is a perfect book for that. The same theme of strong women is in The Virgin Cure as well. It's set in Manhattan in the tenements on the Lower East Side, if you're familiar with those, and it takes place in the 1870s. Moth is the main character. Her father abandoned her and her mother, and then her mother sells her as a servant to a wealthy woman. And this book has quite a cast of characters as Moth deals with her situation and tries to find her own place in the world. She eventually meets a woman who is the owner of a brothel, and she meets other young girls or women who are, I'm going to say, falling prey to the virgin cure, which is this whole idea that having sex with a virgin can heal men. Next on the list is Kate Quinn, who is known for her historical fiction novels and also telling women's stories that might otherwise be forgotten. And we read 2 books by her. First, The Rose Code, which was, I think, the last book actually that our book club read before our book club ended. But that had nothing to do with the book. So The Rose Code is about 3 women who work at Bletchley Park, basically breaking German codes. And there are 2 timelines, 1940 when the war is gearing up, and then 1947 after the women have left Bletchley Park and they are reunited again. And I loved the setting and getting an inside look into this part of history. But there were a few things that I didn't care about with this book. It's still worth a read. I think others in the group enjoyed it more. The second book that we read by Kate Quinn, we all loved. I think it would even be one of the top 10 books of our book club ever read, and that is The Alice Network. And like The Rose Code, this book also has 2 timelines, one during World War I and the other just after the Second World War. So Eve Gardner is the main character in this, and she is a character that has remained with me. She becomes a spy during World War I, a really, really, really good spy. And when Charlie comes to find her in 1947 to ask for her help to look for her missing cousin, the war has taken its toll on Eve. And this is just a brilliant book. There are scenes that I can still bring to mind. In fact, when I looked on Goodreads, I was actually surprised to see that I had only given this 4 stars. I'm actually thinking that because of the way that it has stayed with me, and I still remember quite a bit about it, it should have probably been 5 stars. The 6th author on my list is Canadian author Mary Lawson, and we read 2 of her books as well. The Other Side of the Bridge, which is a story that takes place in northern Ontario. It's usually where she writes, from the 1920s to the 1960s. And the story isn't told in a linear way, but we follow Arthur and Jake Dunn, who are sons of a farmer, and the sibling rivalry that exists between them, and also the woman who basically tears them apart. There's Ian, and Ian is the next generation, and this is kind of his coming of age story in the 1950s. And the themes in this book are like rivalry, jealousy, grief, trauma, and strength of character. Lawson is known for her realistic characters, and that is definitely true in this story. Road Ends is also set in Struan, Ontario. It's also about family, and it also includes tragedy. In this case, it is about the Cartwrights, and it takes place from the 1900s to the 1960s. This story is about family dynamics and how all of the characters kind of cope after a tragedy. Again, the characters and place feel very real. Next up is Wally Lamb, another all-time favorite of mine. Actually, that can probably be said about the rest of the authors on the list. We read 2 books by Wally Lamb as a book club. The Hour I First Believed, which is a fictional account of the Columbine shooting, and it's about so much more than that, though. It's an intense read. It's also huge. He uses real people's name from the shooting, and it's a book that still remains with me for sure. The other book that we read by Wally Lamb was We Are Water. Now, I gave both of these 5 stars, but this one is different than The Hour I First Believed, quite a bit different, I would say. We Are Water is told in several perspectives of members of the OH family, and people connected to them. So if you like family dynamics and family drama, then this is a really good book to pick up for that. Gay marriage has just been legalized, and Annie and Vivica are planning to get married. That sounds easier than it ends up being. So it brings up a lot of hidden secrets, and as Wally Lamb is known to do, he manages to bring some really hot topics to the table. You can never really go wrong with Wally Lamb, in my opinion. The same could be said for the 8th author on the list, John Irving. We read 2 of his books as well. The first was Until I Find You. This book is not one of his better known, I don't think. It's not one of his better loved books. And I also find that people either love the book or they don't. It wasn't one of my favorite books that we read, and I remember our conversation about this one being a bit strange. It's another chunky, it's pretty big. The main character is Jack Burns, and when I think back on it now, this was probably more of a character-driven novel, which I probably wasn't expecting. And since I remember it being about like the different relationships that Jack has with several people, especially his mother and other women, I don't remember a lot about this story, and it's one that I would probably consider doing a reread, as I think I would probably get more out of it on a reread. The next book is one of my all-time favorite books. I think it would probably be in my top 2 or 3 books like of all time ever. A Prayer for Owen, Meany. This book has everything. Great characters, a great story. It's funny, it's heart-wrenching, and it's a book that I will carry in my heart forever. If you haven't read it yet, I highly, highly recommend this one. The last 2 authors, we read 4 books from each of them, and first up is Kristin Hannah. We read Night Road, and this is about an accident that impacts several lives. We read The Great Alone, which is about a family that moves to Alaska and how being isolated affects them. We read The Nightingale. This is about 2 sisters. I think it's told in alternating perspectives as well, if I remember correctly. This is about 2 sisters during World War II. And then just this year, we read The Four Winds, which is about a woman who has to decide how she and her family will survive during the Dust Bowl, and that was in the early 1930s. So all of these stories have been interesting. They have well-developed characters and sense of place. Kristin Hannah has quickly become an auto-buy author for me ever since we started reading her in the book club. That's when I first heard about her, and I'm so glad that we were reading her. So if you are a historical fiction fan, then her books are definitely worth checking out. Last on the list is Canadian author Terry Fallis. We even had Terry Fallis join us after reading one of his books, and he was a delightful guest to have. He was the first author that we had read 4 books, which was the most of any one author at the time. We read The Best Laid Plans, which is basically a satire of Canadian politics and the first in a trilogy. We read Up and Down, which is about sending regular folks to space, and it's also a look at Canada's relationship with the US. We read One Brother Shy, which is about a man trying to figure out who he is after his mother dies. And we, shortly after the pandemic started, actually, we read Albatross, which is about a high school student who has a predisposition to being amazing at playing golf. And all of these novels are funny. Terry Fallis has won the Stephen Leacock Award for humor twice, and all of them have quirky and unique characters. Follis is also known for his older characters, so especially in Up and Down and Albatross, they both have some of my favorite older characters in them. So these are 10 authors that I would definitely recommend to read for book clubs. They were great for conversation. The books that we read are good recommendations. And I would actually say any books by these authors would probably be good for discussion. And of course, they are enjoyable to read on your own as well. So please let me know if you have read any of these authors, or if you have any authors that you would recommend and add to this list. I'm always happy to hear about that. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.